GRA 501. This is a picture of Futaba, Japan. In the coin laundry, a dryer is still loaded with clothes, an orange hooded sweatshirt, a green worker's vest, and 2 pairs of jeans, damp and smelling of mildew. At Joe's Man restaurant near the train station, the menu lists the lunch specials, starting with bacon and eggplant pasta and a tomato cream sauce. Flyer on the open doors of the Nishio clothes shop promotes a 5-day inventory clearance sale. Over the road that runs through the center of town, a white and blue sign proclaims, "Understanding nuclear power correctly will lead to an abundant life." But life by and large is what is absent in this town just a few miles away from the troubled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. Futaba, once home to 7,000 residents, is one of 8 towns forced to evacuate the day after the March 11th earthquake and tsunami damaged the nuclear plant. In the following days, tens of thousands of residents living within 12 miles of the damaged reactors fled. Okay, so this was where I wanted to get to here. Futaba Mayor Katsutaka Idogawa, meanwhile, said it will be years before the residents of his town can return. The utility on Friday said it would begin initial compensation payments of up to 1 million yen, or about $12,000, to residents from an 18-mile zone around the plant, and offer some evacuees called an insufficient short-term SOP. Okay, so they've had to have roadblocks and make sure that the evacuation was mandatory. And when people do go back in, they realize they have to gear up and rush in and grab a few things and then leave right away. But they're actually living in, like government housing. So why I was bringing this up, let me just read this. The level and nature of contamination in the zone will remain unclear as long as the battle to cool the reactors continues. Japanese officials have said hundreds of thousands of terabecquerels of radioactive materials have been released so far, about 1/10 of that released of the 1986 Chernobyl accident in Ukraine. A major part of what has been released from the plant is iodine-131, which has a half-life of 8 days, meaning it will decay within months. But the International Atomic Energy Agency has said it found higher than permissible levels of cesium-137, with a half-life of 30 years. Okay. A dosimeter, a tool that measures exposure to radiation but not specific isotopes, offered a reading of 10 microsieverts per hour in some parts of Futaba. Such a level over a year would be nearly double the maximum amount of radiation permissible for reactor workers, police, and firefighters engaged in disaster prevention. So why I'm reading this is because I read this today that these Fukushima victims required to pay back Tepco compensation. Nearly 2 years after the meltdowns at Fukushima, a report by Greenpeace has revealed companies that helped design and build the reactors are not required to pay any compensation and are in fact profiting from the disaster. Meanwhile, AM has learned that the operator Tepco is handing out what's called temporary compensation, which victims of the meltdowns are forced to pay back. Let's see. Mark Willisey. Yukiko Kameya was born and raised in Fukushima, but the 68-year-old knows she'll probably live out her days in a tiny public housing apartment in Tokyo's colorless urban sprawl. Mrs. Kameya used to live in Futaba town next to the Fukushima nuclear plant, but then came the tsunami of the March 11th, 2011. We were living just 1.2 kilometers from the plant, and we escaped with nothing but the clothes on our back. Mrs. Kameya, was initially given $18,000 in compensation from Tepco, but of that, $11,000 was so-called temporary compensation, meaning once a final settlement was reached, that money would have to be paid back. We had that money deducted from our compensation. I was surprised, so I called Tepco and said they were using dirty tricks, that they were using fraud. Why did they give it to us if we have to pay it back? Mrs. Kameya's testimony is one of several evacuee stories contained in a Greenpeace report to be released today, which claims that tens of thousands of victims of the meltdowns are still denied fair compensation 2 years on from the disaster. But not only that, that report details how companies that helped design and build the Fukushima nuclear plant, such as General Electric, Toshiba, and Hitachi, have been shielded from having to pay any compensation. These fucking bastards. Now nuclear suppliers are completely protected from accepting any liability or being held accountable in case of an accident. GE designed Fukushima Mark I reactor, and both GE, Hitachi, and Toshiba built and continued servicing the reactor, and they are also still making, in some cases, money out of the cleaning efforts as well as the contamination. With the operator Tepco effectively nationalized, the Japanese taxpayer is now picking up most of the compensation bill for the disaster. For victims like Fukushima resident Yukiko Kameya, no compensation will ever be able to return her to her home. It's just unfathomable. Just unfathomable. I'm amazed that anybody who works in Tepco is still alive. I can't believe that they haven't committed hara-kiri, because obviously they're just like any other slaves that worship money and profits before people. Well, my prayers go out to them, and I hope Tepco and all these Hitachi and all these people, I hope they go to hell. I hope they burn in hell. I hope they have nightmares while they're alive. I hope they turn into alcoholics. That's horrible for me to say. I'm sorry. As always, God bless.